Hey there, my e-learning friends. I wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about the short story on the Rainy River and the thesis that you have to create, or that you did create for it, and what that's leading to. So, a couple things. I want to clear up a pretty common misconception with this short story in terms of what the author is trying to get across. So, I normally don't like to editorialize too much about the meaning behind stories, but one thing that I think sometimes happens when students read stories is because you don't have experience reading a lot of different texts, you don't have as much prior learning to bring to a text that that more experienced readers would, and so you understandably draw conclusions about the story based on your expectations about the story. For example, we have a lot of expectations about what heroism means, what courage means. And I think sometimes when I have students who read on the Rainy River, they, rather than read critically, they make assumptions about what O'Brian means when he talks about his own cowardice, and come to conclusions that they can't really support if they use evidence from the text. So, in other words, O'Brian, the character, and let's keep it clear that although there's certainly some overlap between O'Brian the author and O'Brian the character in the story, O'Brian the character does not think that he is a coward because he considered running away and dodging the draft. He thinks that he's a coward because he was morally opposed to the war in Vietnam. But the thought of his parents' reaction and his hometown's reaction, and like his grade 5 teacher's reaction when they found out what he did, would be so difficult to accept that he was more afraid of that than he was afraid of killing or dying. And that's something he actually feels ashamed of. So when you guys are creating your thesis statements, that's something you have to keep in mind, okay? Now, I have given feedback on all of the thesis statements I received. A couple things about a thesis statement. It needs to be specific, it needs to be detailed, and it needs to be arguable. So a thesis statement can't be vague. You need to focus on one particular aspect of the story. It needs to be detailed. So you need to give me in your thesis statement the details that you're going to focus on as part of your thesis. And the biggest thing is that it needs to be arguable. So another way of thinking about arguable is debatable. Can you actually debate this? So for example, On the Rainy River is a story about a young man who faces internal conflict as he decides whether or not to avoid the Vietnam War. That's not a good thesis statement. My iPad's tipping over. It's not a good thesis statement because while it's not very specific actually. It's actually just a summary of the short story. And it's certainly not arguable because no reasonable person could argue that On the Rainy River isn't about a young man who faces internal conflict as he considers running away from the Vietnam War. So, have a look at the examples that I gave you on the assignment page for this activity, for Unit 3, Activity 3. That's the right one. Because I've given you 3 different examples of thesis statements for other texts that give you an idea of what to follow. Now, that's not to say that I want you to still submit to the Dropbox for the thesis statement if you haven't already done so, because that was a formative assignment. The ship has sailed on that one in terms of feedback. But you're still going to need to create a thesis statement because your assignment that's due next week is an analysis of On the Rainy River. That's assignment 3. So I think there were a couple people who actually submitted assignment 3 to the Dropbox for assignment 2, and there was one person who submitted assignment 1 to the Dropbox for assignment 2. So this brings me to another important point. Please do not put the wrong assignment, or don't mix up your Dropboxes. So don't put an assignment 2 in the Dropbox for assignment 1. Some people I think have been doing that because they missed the deadline and the Dropbox closed, and so they figure, oh well, I'll just try to slip it in here. Don't do that because that gets really, really confusing. Secondly, it makes more work for me down the road. And you don't want to make more work for me, do you? You do? Okay, so if you submitted the wrong assignment to Dropbox 2, you don't need to delete it, but I do need you to still submit your assignment to the correct Dropbox later. So if you submitted your 500-word analysis to the Dropbox for assignment 2, please make sure you actually submit it to the Dropbox for assignment 3 when that assignment is due. Now, let's talk about that assignment for a minute. Using the ideas you were able to generate through your analysis of the short story. So remember, you took one particular literary theory and you analyzed your short story from that perspective, okay? I should see some indication of that in your thesis, but as long as your thesis was specific and arguable, I didn't push it. You're only writing a 500-word analysis, so that's 2 pages typed double-spaced. That's not very long. And but I should still see paragraph development in that. I've given you your sample thesis statements, so we talked about that. All right, so what I'm looking at right now is the explanation for assignment 3. You are going to write an approximately 500-word analysis, and so when I say approximately, I'm not too picky about word count, but don't go way over and don't go way under. You need to have a clear thesis statement, so I've given everybody feedback on their thesis statements. If you didn't get, or if you didn't submit your thesis statement, then I strongly, strongly urge you to look at the 3 different examples that I gave you in the explanation for assignment 2. For example, in the history lesson, Jeanette Armstrong illustrates the conflict between stereotypes about Aboriginal peoples and the realities of cultural oppression. That's pretty specific for the poem. In Act 3, Scene 4, Hamlet appears to chastise his mother for being unfaithful to his father, but upon closer examination, it becomes clear that Hamlet is anxious about his mother's power as a sexual being who does not conform to the stereotypical gender roles of expected mothers. Definitely specific, definitely arguable, okay? That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. And you can see in the Hamlet example that I read, that is clearly looking at Hamlet from a feminist lens. And in the history lesson example that I gave you, that's looking at the poem from a post-colonial lens. Okay, so next week you are going to be writing a 500-word analysis for me of the text. I want to see a clear thesis statement. I want to see well-developed paragraphs with evidence from the text. Very, very important. I want to see application of terminology from your chosen literary theory. So you've got to actually have that theory in there. It's got to be clear that you have chosen a particular theory to use. And I want to see body paragraphs that clearly relate to the thesis and a properly formatted works cited page. Now, one note that I put in here is because you are working from a digital text, you won't be able to give page numbers. So I've told you on the assignment page how you should cite the text. Okay? That's it. So again, apologies on behalf of, I don't know what was happening with technology in the world this morning, but if you were trying to get online this morning, none of us could. I don't know what was going on. They haven't actually explained it. But yeah, tomorrow's a PD day for us here in Thames Valley. I will not be logging on because I've got to do professional development. But if you have any questions, I will do my best to check them throughout the day. But this is what you should be working on right now. Okay? I'll talk to you later.